Imagine a world without pizza, without pasta, without gelato. No, this isn't Italy in the early 2000s. This is Europe in the mid-1300s. After one of the deadliest plagues in history wiped out nearly half of its population. Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to look at the Black Death, which killed millions and changed Europe forever. In 1346, ships arrived in Sicily carrying black rats. They were stowaways that had snuck aboard from Asia, where they'd been feasting on the bodies of those who died from the disease known as the plague, or bubonic plague. It's caused by bacteria called Yersinia pestis, and is spread by fleas living on rodents. From Sicily, the rat spread to the rest of Italy, then France, England, Germany, and the rest of Europe over the next few years. It's estimated that around 25 million people died, which was about half of the population. But first, let's talk about how this plague started in the first place. The plague is thought to have originated in Central Asia. From there, it spread along trade routes into China, India, and Persia. Many historians believe that trade with these regions is how the disease made its way onto European ships bound for Sicily. However, others believe that the plague may have traveled along other routes. One idea is that the Mongols carried the disease from Asia to Europe after their armies fought in the Black Sea region and then moved west. Another theory suggests the plague came from victims of the sack of Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade. Europeans who survived the siege may have carried the disease back home with them. However, historians are still working to confirm these theories. We do know that when the plague reached Europe, it spread quickly. At first, the symptoms were so strange and horrific that people didn't even realize it was a new disease. Instead, they blamed existing illnesses like the aforementioned leprosy, which causes sores, fever, weight loss, paralysis, and organ failure. People also suffered from the miasma theory, which held that bad air from swamps and marshes caused diseases like malaria and yellow fever. Today we know that all of these symptoms are actually caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which is spread by fleas living on rodents like rats. Once infected, humans experience fever, chills, weakness, and painful swellings in the lymph nodes called buboes, hence the name bubonic plague. The bacteria can also cause bleeding, pneumonia, and meningitis. As it spread through Europe, it took an estimated 25 million lives, which was around half of the population. While it's hard to know exactly how many people died, because record-keeping was ungreat back then, the death toll is still considered to be one of the highest in history. During the worst-hit areas like England, it's thought that 3 out of every 4 people died. Entire communities were wiped out, leaving entire villages abandoned. So what happened to Europe after losing so many people? Well, the effects of the plague continued for centuries. People began to change the way they practiced religion. Before the plague, most Europeans followed the Catholic Church. However, as millions died and clergy were accused of not doing enough to help, people began to question the Church's teachings and authority. Some turned to new religions, like Protestantism, which emphasized personal experience and rejected church traditions. Others became more interested in mystical and heretical beliefs. Flagellant orders also popped up across Europe. These were groups of men who traveled from town to town whipping themselves as a form of penance for the sins of humanity. There was also a boom in the sale of indulgences, which were pardons for sins sold by the church. This practice was controversial even before the plague, but as people desperately sought forgiveness for themselves or their dead loved ones, more and more people purchased indulgences. After the plague, medicine was never the same either. While the plague was widespread across Europe, not everyone got sick. Some people seemed naturally immune to it. This led some physicians to believe that the best way to treat illness was to intentionally expose people to small amounts of disease. This idea is similar to today's practice of inoculation for diseases like measles and smallpox. Small amounts of the disease are introduced to the body in order to build up immunity against it. However, methods of inoculation back then were risky and sometimes even deadly. One common method involved taking fluids from someone suffering from the plague and putting them inside of a small wound on a healthy person's skin. Sometimes the disease would subside, but other times it would return with deadly results. Despite the risks, this practice continued for hundreds of years. And while it eventually helped to eradicate deadly diseases, it also claimed many lives in the process. For the survivors, life would never be the same. As the plague continued to ravage Europe, people tried to escape the deadly disease by fleeing to the countryside. However, they soon found that they couldn't outrun it. Rural areas were just as badly hit as cities were, so they began to move farther away, often to remote islands or forests. These people became known as flagellants because they whipped themselves as a sign of penance for the sins of humanity. Villages and towns were sometimes spared, while those nearby were wiped out. Some believe that this was because the people in these communities were healthier or more religious than those in other places. However, it might have had more to do with the layout of the towns. In the Middle Ages, most European towns were built inside of a defensive wall with a single entrance. When the plague struck, the residents could close the gate at night and keep infected people from coming in or leaving. Towns that were built in more rural areas outside of walls, or those that were too poor to build them, were hit much harder. After the plague, people began to change the way they buried the dead. Because so many people were dying, cemeteries quickly filled up. In some places, corpses were thrown into mass graves. Others dug up old graves and used them again. Still others turned to more macabre methods of dealing with the dead. Some German towns passed laws that said that family members had to take turns carrying the coffin to the cemetery. These people were only allowed to travel at night. However, to make things easier, some families opted to rent a horse or dog to carry the coffin instead. As if all of this hadn't been bad enough, the plague also led to a huge spike in prices. As the disease killed off millions, the cost of food and other goods skyrocketed. For example, between 1348 and 1351, the price of wheat quadrupled in England. And in France, the price of a pound of butter went from 6 pennies to 2 shillings and 8 pence. This spike in prices caused major problems for farmers and landowners who were already struggling to make ends meet. It also contributed to the decline of feudalism, which had already begun earlier in the century. Under feudalism, peasants worked the land owned by a lord or lady in exchange for protection and a small portion of the profits. But as prices rose, the peasants found it impossible to pay their landlords with the tiny amounts they were able to grow. Eventually, many abandoned the farms and became wage laborers in the cities. Overall, the Black Death had a profound effect on Europe and its people. It killed millions, changed the way people practiced religion and interacted with each other, and contributed to the decline of feudalism. It also left Europe short-staffed. Millions of jobs went unfilled, allowing for those who were still alive to demand higher wages and better working conditions. In fact, some historians believe that the Black Death contributed to the beginning of the Renaissance, because it shifted the balance of power between the working class and the wealthy. Without enough workers, the wealthy elite had to start paying more attention to the concerns of the lower classes in order to ensure that they would work for them. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. You can also subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in your newsfeed. Thanks for watching. See you next time.